What's up, you sweaty nerds and greasy degenerates? So unless you've been living under a rock for the past week, you've probably heard of the new endgame mode in Honkai Star Rail known as Pure Fiction. This will be a new endgame mode in addition to what we already have with Memory of Chaos. However, the character team setups, the character requirements, the different compositions and synergies that we want to have out of our team are completely different in Pure Fiction than what we would normally be doing in Memory of Chaos. So it is definitely worthy of having its own specified tier list, which is different from the Memory of Chaos tier list we're used to enjoying. So in this video, we will explore and compare my Pure Fiction tier list with Prydwen.gg's Pure Fiction tier list. So let's get into this. Alright, let's see how many people we can piss off today by simply talking about the most well-respected tier list in the Honkai Star Rail community, and that is found here at Prydwen.gg. Come take a look at this for yourself. I'll put a link to this in the pinned comment and description below. Highly recommend you come take a look at their site because they have a lot more than just tier lists and stuff here. Anyways, let's keep moving forward. They are constantly adjusting and adapting to what players want and what the meta sort of is changing into. That's one reason why this is the most well-respected and most understood tier list in the Honkai Star Rail community. Now, they've made some changes here, and we will be going over the Pure Fiction and whatnot in just a moment. I just briefly, and I did put in my own take on like what I consider to be the Pure Fiction tier list, which is very similar to theirs, but there are some slight differences in my tier list. We'll compare those in just a moment. But briefly, I just wanted to say that all the debuffers got moved over to the, what happened here? Oh, this is Pure Fiction. All the debuffers got moved over to the amplifier slots, and they've added the specialist column here. So the specialist column is specifically for characters like Kafka, who unlocks DOT meta, Topaz, who unlocks the follow-up meta. We have Luca and Shui Yi, the breakers. We have Welt, who slows enemies and helps with that. So very specific type of play styles here that has been added, and I really, really like that. I don't like they took away the single target, blast damage, and AoE. I think that it was helpful to players that knew what they were looking at to be able to see that, and you can't see that anymore when you're hovering over the character on the tier list for Memory of Chaos. I don't know why that's the case. Maybe they just haven't added it yet with the adjustment. Maybe they decided to make it look more clean and easier for players to digest, but it feels a little bit weird to see Argenti so low when you know that in Memory of Chaos, depending on the enemy weakness, he's going to pop off like crazy, and I think he deserves an S tier for certain scenarios, but he does fall off in single target when you're stuck there with only the boss enemy left. So let's move on in the video here. Let's move over to Pure Fiction. That's why we're kind of doing this. I will talk more about the Memory of Chaos situation when Dr. Ratio releases, so let's focus on the Pure Fiction stuff right now. So the Pure Fiction tier list obviously differs from the Memory of Chaos tier list so much it's not even funny. It's a completely different game mode with completely differently good characters. For example, you see Argenti is probably the best character in this game mode because there's different ways you can play him, and you have options for that, and he's just really, really good. There's different ways you can use him, there's different supports you can use behind him, etc., etc. He pops off in this game mode. It's like it was practically made for him. Obviously, we'll probably see some changes in the future when Pure Fiction makes its adjustments and we get a new Pure Fiction, and they end up probably buffing certain other characters. I hope that they continue this trend of it's a relatively short experience to get through all of the Pure Fiction stages, but they end up buffing a ton of different characters that you wouldn't have expected them to be good in a game mode unless it was very specific, like Pure Fiction does. This sort of incentivizes players to create new builds and try out different light cones and relics, and it gives different characters viability that didn't otherwise have it. Take a look at take a look at Herta, for instance. She's an S+ character, according to Prydwen, and me as well. I very much agree with their statement here. In Memory of Chaos, she's a B tier. That's pretty low. And by the way, she's a B tier during a Memory of Chaos where enemies are ice weak. This is literally the best Memory of Chaos you could ever possibly have for her, and she's a B tier right now. That's kind of wild. Now let's take a look at some of the supports, because, well, actually, you know what? We're not done here, because I gotta say something. I think Himiko should be up here in S+ tier too. I put her in S+ tier on my list. The Wombo combo with Herta and Himiko does require both of them, and I think that you can get sometimes more out of your Himiko than you can out of Herta. The thing is, with Herta, you can get some cool follow-up synergies that don't require you to have Himiko on the battlefield. So I think that's why they've given Herta the edge over Himiko. But in my opinion, Himiko can deal more damage. Like, how do I say this? Like, she's more consistently defeating waves than Herta is a lot of the time. If you, for example, if you have a low invested team, your Himiko is probably going to be better than your Herta some of the time. It really just depends. So that's why I consider Himiko to be as worthy of Herta for the S+ tier slot. Maybe not quite as good as Herta, because Herta can be used on many different teams. But as you can see, I've put Himiko up here because I think she deserves it. I mean, let her pop off, for God's sake. You know what I mean? Like, this is her chance to shine, okay? Jesus Christ, let her shine for a moment, okay? Let her shine, girl. Anyways, let's round out the rest of the S+ tier section here. Obviously, you see Bronya, you see Ruon Mei here. I agree with this statement. I agree that Ruon Mei and Bronya are very good for this game mode. I think that Ruon Mei is the best support for the game mode. So you want to know what? I'm going to put her up here. I put the DPSs in the front just because I just did. But Ruon Mei is, in my opinion, the best support for this game mode, and it's not even close. Because you can run like 3 different DPS characters on a team with her on the team, and all of your DPS characters will get buffed. She makes the 0 sustain meta more viable than it ever was before, and Pure Fiction really goes to show how good a character like her can be in a game mode like this, and outside of it too. She's already unlocking dual DPS meta in other game modes. I still think Hyper Carry's better with her, but you know, she gives you that option. And in Pure Fiction, she literally can make it so that you run 3 different DPS characters if you wanted, and still get massively buffed off of your Ruon Mei. She's incredibly strong. For example, I ran the Herta Himiko Wombo combo, and I tried it out with Asta because I wanted to see if the speed buff would be enough to like really get that combo to crack off even more often. But the damage I was getting out of it wasn't as high as I wanted, and I wasn't getting as fast of clears because Ruon Mei's buffs are so substantial that it was actually outperforming Asta's speed, which I thought would have been like ideal for this type of scenario, and it just kind of wasn't. So I just wanted to point out that Ruon Mei is, in my opinion, the best support for this game mode. It's not even close. Bronya, of course, she can super hyper buff certain characters. You could run, what is it? You could, for example, you could run an Argenti, right? You can run an Argenti, and because he only uses like 1 skill at a time, you could run Ting Yun and like Bronya, for example. Ting Yun is so skill point efficient that you could basically spam a skill like every turn with Bronya and give Argenti his like basically like 2 attacks every cycle, or you know, 2 attacks every rotation. It's really, really powerful, and you know, Bronya really makes that possible. You can really hyper focus in on your damage on a character, and she can give you those extra turns even if your character is slower than other characters. So I just wanted to point that out. Now let's get to a little bit of a controversial one here before we keep going. Ruon Mei, sorry, Ting Yun is here in S tier. I consider her to still be S+, because the type of characters that you want to run her with, like Jing Liu, for example, like Argenti, for example, this game mode really wants you to ult, like super duper often. Why do you think Serval is higher than Jing Yuan? Because Serval gets to ult more often in this game mode because she gets energy back faster. That's literally just the way it goes. She's better than Jing Yuan in this game mode in most cases because she gets to ult so often. Ting Yun will allow you to be able to ult more often because she literally can give your main DPS energy. She's incredibly strong still to this day. The example I gave you about why Bronya could be so good pretty much requires you to also have Ting Yun. So why is this a thing when a lot of the times Bronya is better because of Ting Yun? I just don't get that. That's just my opinion. That's my different take. on this situation so far. I will have some other different takes. Fuxuan and Huohuo, I do consider them to be the best supports, and it's not even close. I mean, look at this. I put Locha down here too. They did as well in A tier, and there's a reason for that. We'll explain that. These are the only two sustain characters in the entire game that can actually give you improved damage. And that's so valuable in this particular game mode. Fuxuan makes it so that you never have to worry about any of your characters getting hurt in this game mode. They just won't. He'll also give you extra damage. Huohuo, however, can give you energy as well, allowing you to be able to ult more often. So why Prydwen is a character like Huohuo all the way up here in S+ tier, partially because of the, yeah, sure, the attack buff, but also the energy you give. Why is Tingyun down here? I don't get it. What's the discrimination for? Anyways, so those two are obviously the best characters for the sustain slot, and it's not even close because Locha just doesn't have that. You might as well run literally any other sustain besides them because you don't need much sustainability in the game mode. You don't even need a sustain. You could zero sustain. So because of that, Locha just falls off really, really hard. He's almost down here with the rest of the supports like Bailu and Lynx and Natasha over here. And I put Natasha here, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain in a minute. But let's move forward to some more interesting takes here, because I have a differing opinion on one of these characters in the S tier slot. So Himiko, you already know. I think she deserves to be S+ tier. Let's talk about Seele. Seele is really, really good in this game mode. She can get her resurgence triggers really often. She can clear mobs very, very easily. So that's really, really powerful. And it's actually really interesting how you're able to it's a very fun playstyle too, to clear mobs with Seele, especially in this game mode. It's never been more fun than now. So Seele, once again, very good character to this day. She is still one of the best in the game, and she came out in 1.0. Pretty crazy. Now Serval, very fun and interesting situation we have with Serval. She's an S tier character in this game mode because she gets energy back faster. We talked about this a little bit with the Jingyuan comparison. She's able to ult more often. You're able to focus. You know what characters you're hitting. There's a little bit of RNG with Jingyuan, and that's just not usually that great for the game mode in Jingyuan's case. Serval will be better in most cases. She's more consistent than Jingyuan in this game mode, and that's really important. In basically every single other game mode, you would see this completely flipped. But in this particular game mode, Serval is better, in my opinion, and even better potentially than Kafka. Kafka, unless you're running Kritka in this game mode, is not going to be doing as well as you would hope. She wants to get those clears immediately. She doesn't want to wait for her DOTs to go off. She wants to... You need those enemies gone now. Okay, so Kritka is definitely the character that you need to be running for this game mode. If you have a Kafka, I wouldn't necessarily go building Kritka just for the game mode, but just something to point out there. Now let's look at what they've got going on. Everything seems the same here. Asta, A tier, yes. The speed is very valuable, especially depending on your team. It's still very, very strong. She can't dual sustain or triple sustain as well as Ruan Mei, but that's why she's here in S. I also put Pela in S tier, which they did not do for some reason in their tier list, and there's a reason for that. Your Pela can actually clear waves with her ult, and she gets her ult more often than most other characters. She doesn't get it quite as often as Seele or Argenti or Himiko will in this game mode, for example, because they're getting a lot of clears and a lot of enemies defeated whenever they do attack, even if it's their skill a lot of the time. So they get a ton of energy back because of that, especially Argenti. Every time you clear enemies, he gets energy, and then he gets energy whenever they enter the battlefield. So he's ulting the entire time. But as far as your support slot, what other support do you have that can actually clear waves? Exactly. So I don't see why Pela isn't here at S tier. I don't know why she's dropped all the way down to A tier. I don't even have a DPS Pela, which a lot of people have DPS Pela. I don't even have DPS Pela, and she's clearing waves. So I don't get it. And there's one of the game modes, one of the sides is Ice Weak. So why is she in A tier? I don't get that. I disagree with that one heavily. That's one that I don't think a lot of other people would argue as well if they're used to using her. She's very good in the game mode. I don't know what that's about. So let's move on to give some more characters some love. So for Blade, I want to put Blade up here too. I really do, but there's not enough wind weak enemies in my opinion. Maybe you can sync up some really fun stuff with Blade. This is a tough one for me. I'm really on the fence about this. Like I kind of was on the fence about Ting Yun, but I think that I already made arguments for why she should deserve to be up here. It's harder for me to make good excuses to put Blade a little bit higher. He has really good damage. He can get follow-ups. He can ult really often because of that. He's really, really good. I'm really on the fence about putting him a little bit higher. But here's one reason why I put him here. I don't know if Jing Liu can be up here in S tier. You can technically synergize really well with her, especially using a Ting Yun to get her to where she is performing as well as this. But that's somewhat niche. And unless you have that team set up, you're not going to be able to do it as much as you think. And if she falls out of her buffed state, you're screwed. That's why you have to have a Ting Yun. Maybe even a Huo Huo on your team for Jing Liu to be as good as an S tier character. It's very specific. It's very niche. Not every player has that. So unfortunately, I think that she does probably deserve to be down here at A. It sucks. That's my girl. That's my DPS right there. But I have to do what's right, and I think that she does not quite. For many players, she will fall out of her buffed state, and then all of a sudden, their entire run is screwed because now she has to build back into her state. And you might even have to ult early, which may not necessarily clear a wave in order to get her back into her buff state. So I think she's down here. And because of that, I don't think Blade is better than Jing Liu in this game mode. I think they're like neck and neck here. I think they're really neck and neck. And because of that, I'm leaving them here at A tier. So Clara, this one was a little tough too. Because Clara can be good in the game mode, but she's not quite as good as you'd think. She wants to have certain synergies, and those synergies don't necessarily work the best in the game mode. If you're running Clara and where is she? Topaz? This is actually a really good combo for the game mode if you have the right enemy weakness. The problem is that Topaz wants to be on side 2 and Clara wants to be on side 1. So there's a bit of a problem with your team build if you do that. Will you have enough fire type DPS characters for side 2 if you pair these two together for side 1? Are you getting what you actually really need? So despite Clara being very good, is she better than Blade and Jing Liu in this game mode? I don't know. I'm using these two as kind of a benchmark to decide whether a character's S or not. And I don't think that she is better than Jing Liu or Blade for the game mode. That's just my personal opinion. But, you know, let me know what you think in the comments. So I don't think anything's really changed here. Let's keep moving down A tier. Jing Yuan is down here for the reasons we already specified. He just isn't as good as Serval in this game mode. It's just facts. And he's probably not better than any of these. He's probably just as good. So despite there's being some lightning weak enemies, he's about as good as these other characters you see here in this game mode. So I actually have a somewhat controversial take here. With our main character here, we have her at A tier. She's A tier on the tier list for Prydwen as well, but specifically as the defense character, as the preservation character, the Fire MC. I put her here not just for Fire MC, but I put her here for physical DPS as well. I don't necessarily agree that she should be down here in in C tier. I think she's good, or he, she, whatever, is good enough for, depending on who you choose, right? I think he's good enough. He's good enough for B tier because of that skill being able to hit 3 enemies at once and the ult being able to hit 3 enemies at once. I think it's actually not that bad of an option. I don't think it's quite deserving of C tier, so that's why I put her in the A tier. Now, let's go ahead and put her at the bottom of A tier because that makes more sense. Okay, she's barely good enough for the A tier. Now, let's keep moving. Hanya works pretty well because there's physical weak enemies in the mode for side 1. and she can also help with skill point synergies. The only problem with Hanya is she would be up here, but there's a problem with Hanya. You are clearing enemies so often that you don't get as many skill points as normal out of her that you would on a normal team in a normal game mode. So because of that, you don't get as many skill points as you'd want from her. She practically acts as a sub DPS because she can take out an enemy at the same time as defeating it. So the skill isn't really utilized very well because she pretty much defeats the enemy the moment she hits it. So it doesn't really get you what you want. So she falls off a little bit because of that. You pretty much have to use her skill on the boss enemies, and there's just not enough boss enemies in the mode for it to really matter. Yukong is also down here in A tier as well. Let me just make sure they did this too. Oh yeah, here we are. Yeah, they have the same thing going on here. The only difference is Pela for this particular column. So with Yukong, she's still a buffer. At the end of the day, she works just as well as normal, and she doesn't really lose anything in the game mode like Hanya loses something, so you see that Hanya's normally better. But Yukong doesn't necessarily lose anything by being in the game mode, and she's still a buffer at the end of the day. So she falls into A tier, in my opinion, where she belongs. She works the best with imaginary teams, and there's not really any imaginary enemies in the mode that, like, there's not enough of them to really, for it to matter. I mean, shoot, you see Dan Hung and Bibiter Luna here in B tier. Like, what's that about? So, yeah, there you go. Yukong can work well for your DPS characters if you have no other supports. So she remains in A tier. Locha, some people aren't going to like this. Some people are going to hate my guts. This is going to piss off a few people. Locha is an A tier because that's where he deserves to be in this case. It's a little bit of a hot take for some, but even Prydwen agrees with this, that he did not get the S tier ranking because he simply just isn't as good as Ushuan and Huohuo. He does not provide any other extra damage beyond his own personal damage, which is not very substantial. So I just can't put him in S tier. I just can't, because he's barely better than any other support, or sorry, any other sustain you could use, and it's only because he's so reliable. You'll literally never have to use any of his abilities. You can just basic attack every single turn pretty much, and he'll be just fine. That's the only reason why I consider him to be better than the other sustains, because you may need to use a skill like once or twice in the game mode. With another, his healing is so good you won't have to do that. So he does get an edge above the other sustains, but not enough to take him into the S+ tier or S tier. He falls off a little, and that's unfortunate. Now, let's look at B tier. B tier, I have here Topaz, QQ. Let's see if there's any differences here. B tier, Topaz, QQ. I think this is all pretty much the same. Yeah, I would agree with this, except for Natasha. I have Natasha in here rather than being all the way down here. And what have I done? Oh no. Rather than have Natasha all the way down here with March, I have Natasha up here in the bottom of B tier. And I'll explain that in just a moment. With Topaz, she doesn't quite get to do what she wants to do. I explained that earlier with the Clara combo and some of the other combos you have with her. She just doesn't really truly get to do what you want her to do in the mode. I think that with the right team setup, you can probably still get the clear with her, but it's going to be tougher than normal. She just falls off in this game mode, and it's rather unfortunate. That's just the way it goes sometimes. She doesn't quite have the synergies you want. Some of the characters she has synergies with, you want that character for the other side, so you can't realistically always pair them together. So unless you have the right team setup, it just isn't going to work as well as you have other options to. I mean, if you have, you know, the ability to like split up two good synergies just so she can fit on the right team for the right side, I don't know. You probably have enough characters to build stronger teams. So I don't know why you'd even use this, right? That's just my opinion. QQ, poor QQ. She's actually really good on the first two stages, and then she's not good on the second two stages, which are the only stages that even matter really, because everybody can get through 1 and 2. So unfortunately, she kind of falls off, and she's way too skill point hungry, right? She's way too skill point hungry to deserve a higher slot. She uses way too many skill points. Same thing with Dan Hung and Bibiter Lune. They're blasting through all the skill points you have, not allowing you to use the skill points you need with your other characters to clear the content. They sort of hurt your team by them being the main DPSs you focus on. So, unfortunately, Dan Heng and QQ kind of fall off in this game mode. And Sampo kind of gets a little bit of a buff. I'm actually even going to put him up here. Because Sampo, like Blade, there are at least some wind-type weaknesses in the game mode, and they can benefit from that. Sampo has a little bit more RNG because of his bounce effect, but he's still really darn good. He's still a very good character, even without Kafka, just something I wanted to point out. So definitely worth considering Sampo if you have a well-built Sampo. And you see Gepard and these other sustains down here because that's just kind of what happens when you have a game mode that benefits off of actual damage sustains. Unfortunately, Gepard, Lynx, Natasha, Bailu, they don't provide any extra damage. It's not very helpful. It just they fall off really hard, so they're here in B tier. Welt is an interesting case because I think he is pretty good, but there's not a lot of imaginary weakness in the game mode, and he slows the enemies down, so he can be your solo sustain if you want. That way you don't have to run a sustain. Forget about these guys not giving you any extra damage. Welt's a way better sustain than all three of these characters. When you think about it like that, Welt almost deserves to be up here if you consider him to be your sustain character, rather than using a healer or a tank. You can just run Welt, slow the enemies to a point where they can't hurt you, and you end up getting a benefit from that. Here's the problem. You're clearing the enemies so fast, you don't really need to slow them down. That's the problem. And so he, unfortunately, despite that little bit of cool information we have about the fact that he can solo sustain, it doesn't really matter in this game mode if you're clearing the content so fast. So he falls off. You have Shui Yi. She can work well in the game mode because she can break, and she doesn't care who the enemy is. Her ult gets to break, but she won't be able to properly work in the game mode without that, and she only gets that every time she ults. You need another character that can do more damage every single turn rather than have to, like, sort of wait till a really powerful turn or something like that, if that makes sense. So Shui Yi, she falls off a bit. Guanifan has a similar problem to, let's say, like Sampo. The problem with Guanifan is that Guanifan does have some debuffing, which won't really work in the game mode because the enemies aren't in the field for long enough, and she doesn't do enough damage unless she has DOT, but DOT takes time. And like I said earlier with Kafka, you don't want to run DOT characters normally as a DOT. You'd want to run them as crit characters instead. And Guanifan just doesn't have the juice in this game mode. She just doesn't have the juice. She's good for the weakness breaks, but you have other good characters that can weakness break better, like Himiko. So unfortunately, she falls off a little bit. But if you need somebody on your team to get the breaks on top of a Himiko, like you pair the two together, they will work well together. It's just Himiko's the star of the show, and Guanifan's kind of like the backup character. Now, Natasha, she's up here instead of down here because she has physical damage that she can deal. She can actually eliminate enemies on side 1 in this game mode, and other characters cannot do that. Like, maybe Gepard might be able to, but his damage usually isn't as good as, let's say, a Natasha, especially at E6. So I don't think there's a change here. I didn't do anything different here. Yeah, Natasha's the only one. I think Natasha deserves one little tiny bump up because she can actually defeat enemies. I don't necessarily think she's, as good as Locha all of a sudden because of that, but no. In this game mode, she's slightly better than March just because she can actually get some enemies removed off the battlefield, which does have some very small amount of value. So not much of a big difference in the B tier there, but that's the difference I made, is that I think Natasha's slightly better than they gave her credit for. C tier is the most empty out of all of the tiers you can see here, and that's because I did not put Kalis or Stel down here because I thought that being that it's a good preservation unit in the game mode, because of the fire weakness on some of the enemies. I also think that he gets a little bit of a bump because of physical. Getting the breaks that you want is really good, and I don't think there's enough value thrown into that on their particular tier list. So you see Kalis and Stella are a little bit higher up. Where'd I put them? Over here, the bottom of A. They might even deserve to be here in B. You know what I mean? Maybe we'll put them in B. Screw it. So Silver Wolf just isn't good in the game mode. She just isn't. There's not enough bosses. There's not enough enemies that require you to debuff them as heavily as her. She just doesn't get to do what she wants to do in the game mode. And I can't believe it, but Honkai Star Rail finally made a game mode that Silver Wolf isn't good in. She's good at like so many different things in so many different ways. She's so versatile, but they finally made a game mode that she is not like an S or S plus tier character in. And that's honestly more impressive than anything I think they've ever done in this game. Now Hook, poor Hook. Hook finally got a moment to shine. Oh, what are you saying? The second half of the harder stages is going to be Fire Week? It's finally my time to shine, everybody. And then, oh, sorry, Hook. We need AoE damage. We need blast damage. You're a single target, bro. That's not going to cut it, man. Like Seela can work because she gets resurgence and she can build up her ult, then she cracks her ult, then she gets to go again and again and again and again. Hook don't got that. Okay, Hook don't got none of that. Hook's cool. I like Hook. I think Hook's actually like an underrated character, but not in this game mode. Jesus Christ. Honestly, Hook should be down here, but because of the Fire Week on side 2, Hook does deserve to be up here. I just think that's hilarious. That Hook finally had a moment to shine, and then it was like, nope, sorry. Now, March is a sustain, so March isn't down here right now, but March does not cut it compared to literally every other sustain in this game mode. Why the hell would you be putting shields on characters if you could just wait until you ult with Lynx or Bailu, or, you know, you could just hit basic attack every single time with other sustains in this game mode, wait till their ult comes around, and then just heal everybody with the ult, like it, or passive healing. She requires, in order to be able to sustain you, to be able to use skill points, and that is not good. She almost deserves to be down here, but she is technically a sustain, and there are some ice weak enemies, so I don't know, maybe that helps. So there you go. Now I don't think I have any differences here. I agree with pretty much everything on the bottom half. Yep, I agree with everything on the bottom half here. We have Dan, we have Yangxing, we have Su Shang, and we have Mr. Luca over here. All these characters are just not that good in the game mode for one reason or another. Yangxing, he just doesn't get enough like turns in order for his ice damage to really matter, which is insane. I think he might deserve to be up here, but he just doesn't. He just one enemy at a time. That's not good enough in this game mode. It just isn't. So he falls off. Luca, similar issue. Hits one enemy at a time. That's not enough, bro. You ain't gonna get it done. All these hunt. You know, notice that it's hunt, and then frickin' Arlen here. Poor Arlen, bro. But he's all the way at the back. Okay, he's over here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. I fixed it. The tier list is done. Arlen is on the bench because why not? You know what I mean? Asta deserves better. Don't forget that. Asta deserves better, everybody. Okay, obviously I'm kidding. There's nothing wrong with Arlen. He just isn't good in the game mode. That's it. That's literally it. Anyways, if this was helpful or informative in any way, shape, or form, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one when Dr. Ratio comes out and we go over the Memory of Chaos tier list. All right, peace out.